the technology was one of the key pillars of the policy of containment that Israel fell in love with, or I call it the fairy tale, that ultimately was the prism through which we saw and looked at everything, all intelligence, everything that we saw in Gaza. And sadly, tragically, the failed policies that led to the October 7th attack.
On September 17, 2025, Israel announced that the world's first laser defense system was ready for deployment and was being integrated into its multi-tiered missile defense shield. Iron Beam may be the most significant advance in missile defense since Israel pioneered the concept of intercepting missiles with missiles back in the 1980s. That's because Iron Beam promises to solve one of modern warfare's most vexing problems: the economic asymmetry of defense. When a crude, unguided rocket or drone costing a few $1,000s requires $50,000 or $100,000 worth of interceptors to stop it, the math quickly becomes unsustainable. The scale of rocket, drone, and missile fire into Israel over the last couple of years, coupled in turn with the unlaunched arsenals that Iran and her proxies still have in reserve, would, if each one needed to be defended by traditional interceptors, cripple Israel's economy. But Iron Beam changes that calculus entirely. Welcome to the Tikvah podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Silver. Rather than the $40,000 or $50,000 needed for each interceptor, each laser interception costs roughly $2, the price of electricity. The system has what military officials call an endless magazine, capable of firing continuously as long as it has power. The Iron Dome system is already battle-tested, shooting down over 40 drones from Lebanon during recent conflicts, but this breakthrough also raises profound questions. Israel's October 7th intelligence failures partly stemmed from an over-reliance on technological solutions, the belief that smart fences and surveillance systems could replace human judgment and offensive action. As Israel celebrates this remarkable achievement of military innovation, how does it also ensure that Iron Beam enhances, rather than replaces, sound strategic thinking? These are some of the subjects I discuss with my guest today, Yaakov Katz, former Jerusalem Post editor and author of the new book, While Israel Slept. Together, we explore what Iron Beam means for Israel's defense, for the defense cooperation between Israel and America, and for the future of warfare. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to the Tikvah podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. I hope you'll leave us a 5-star review to help us grow this community of ideas. I welcome your feedback on this or any of our other podcast episodes at podcast@tikvah.org. And of course, if you want to learn more about our work at Tikvah, you can visit our website, tikvah.org, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Here now is my conversation with Yaakov Katz. Yaakov Katz, welcome to the Tikvah podcast.
It's great to be with you.
So we're just meeting to speak, about a week or so after Israel officially declared Iron Beam operational. And I want to just begin by asking you to put this in some historical context. How significant you think this announcement is for Israel's defense posture. And it's, and I think that it could have consequences for the conduct of defensive warfare globally.
I don't think I'll be exaggerating by saying that this is a monumental step and historic for the state of Israel. I mean, we've long known, Jonathan, that the state of Israel has a very sophisticated and multi-layered architecture of missile defense. Israel's pretty much the first country in the world to develop a missile that can intercept another missile. This started back, original planning of it was back in the 1980s, around the time of the Reagan Star Wars program, that some crazy Israeli engineers said, why don't we try to get some money out of the Americans and develop a system that later became known as the Arrow. And from the Arrow missile, which now is already in its third iteration known as Arrow 3, we have, of course, Arrow 2, and we have David Sling for the medium-range missiles and rockets, and of course, Iron Dome, which is the most famous of them all and the most frequently used. And this has long been the story of Israel, of how it's been able to defend itself and take what should have been a strategic threat against this small country, rockets and missiles, and turn them into something that, well, yes, still a threat and still capable of causing casualties and damage, but more of a nuisance, I would say, than something that really puts the existence of the state of Israel in jeopardy. Iron Beam and the announcement that it has effectively been effective and has been battle tested and has been used to intercept dozens of targets over the last few months of this war, mostly the war that continues against Hamas, but also used in the north against drones from Lebanon, come to show us that Israel once again is breaking new ground, is setting a new history, a new record, and is the first country to roll out an operational laser defense system. I mean, it really is Star Wars when you think about it. I mean, that's literally what Ronald Reagan imagined, 40 something years ago now. Israel is putting into practice the stuff that we used to think could only exist in movies is literally playing out on the different fronts of Israel's battles here.
There are different ages of people that we have that are listening to this program. And for some people, there's a Star Wars reference that's very clear. For a slightly younger generation, think of the G.I. Joe's cartoons that you were watching when you were a kid, and they're shooting lasers back and forth at one another. But I mean, maybe that's an opportunity to actually just ask you, very clearly explain for people who don't know what Iron Beam is. What is it in simple terms? And what makes a laser weapon system different from traditional interceptors?
Well, first of all, what Iron Beam is it is a system that essentially is a ground-based, high-powered laser air defense system that was developed and designed to be able to shoot out of the air threats such as, aerial threats, but such as rockets, mortars, or drones, right? So think of all the different things, projectiles that have been thrown at Israel over the last 2 years almost since October 7th. And obviously many, many years before then.
Right.
Iron Beam is meant to provide a defense against those different threats. Now, it has limitations and it has some advantages, and we could talk about that. But what it effectively does is it is able to provide a defense. And what it uses to do that is a high-powered laser. So think of a beam that you probably won't even see with the human eye. We shouldn't be able to see it, but it uses different types of lasers. And I'm not a scientist to be able to explain exactly what these different lasers are, but it's different components that put together create a high-powered laser. We're talking about approximately, you measure the laser's power based on kilowatts. So we're looking at about 100 kilowatts is the big, strongest, most robust version of the ground-based version. That's, imagine kind of like a shipping container size. On that shipping container, you'll have a couple of what really almost look like, the best way to kind of describe it is some sort of like dome that turns around with a mirror on it. And out of that mirror, or glass periscope almost, if you want to call it that, a laser shoots out. And obviously it can rotate and it can move and it can be pointed in different directions. And that's what it effectively does, is it uses this high-powered laser to create and cause structural damage to whatever that threat is that's making its way towards the state of Israel. So it hones in the laser on the threat. So if it's a drone or a missile or a mortar for that matter, and it basically burns a hole into it. And with that structural damage causes that aircraft or projectile to crash instead of being able to hit its target.
Right. Now, the time that 100 kilowatt beam rests on the target is called the dwell time. And that's going to be important for later in our discussion, but I just want to introduce that term now since you brought it up. The dwell time is one of the variables that, on which the success and failure of this as a tool in Israel's multi-layered defense shield will rest. But I do want to come back because you in putting this into context, you sort of introduced us through a gallery or pageant of Israeli innovation over the years. from the Arrow system and Trophy and Iron Dome and David's Sling and all of these different things. I guess I want to go back to the human capital question, just as we begin this conversation. What is it about Israel's approach to defense innovation that you think leads it to make these kind of, that produces these breakthrough technologies time and again?
It's really a great question, and it's one that I've long spent a lot of time trying to figure out, right? What makes this country so unique that it really is able to develop some of these groundbreaking systems and lead the world. Israel's not the only country trying to develop a high-powered laser defense system. I'll take you back in time. I mean, I was in an aircraft hangar. I think it was Arizona or California. I can't remember exactly. I was trying to think about this before our conversation. Maybe about 15 years ago, to see the ABL, the airborne laser that Boeing and Northrop Grumman were developing. It was basically an airplane, like I think it was a big 747 jumbo jet that had a massive kind of nose, like a dolphin or something like that. And on that was this laser system. And the aircraft had to be so big because it had to carry all these different chemicals, right? There's two types of lasers. There's a chemical-based laser and a solid-based laser. And so back then, solid-based laser was still kind of a bit beyond the scientific capability at the time. So everyone was basically mixing chemicals to create a laser. The US government, together with Boeing, probably dropped on that aircraft, I think, if I recall correctly, $4 to $5 billion, right? Nothing ever came of it. It was never effective, right? So people have been trying to develop these systems for decades. There was a project back after the Second Lebanon War in 2006 when 4,300 rockets were fired by Hezbollah into Israel. And that's when development of Iron Dome began. Right. And when we created a kinetic rocket that can be fired and hit an incoming rocket. But at the time, there was a system called the Nautilus, and then later referred to as the Skyguard, which was also similar type of idea, a container-shaped type of base on the ground with a laser, but again, chemical, not strong enough, not high-powered, and very limited, definitely in adverse weather conditions. But Northrop Grumman was putting immense pressure on the Israeli government at the time to prioritize Skyguard / Nautilus over Iron Dome. Thankfully, the Israeli Defense Ministry went with the Iron Dome option because look at what an amazing success it has been. But my point is that people have been trying to do this for a very long time. I think what it is about Israel is that Israel has something that many countries just simply don't have. I don't want to claim that Israelis are smarter or, better scientists or better engineers, but we do have something that other countries don't have. And it's called the existential factor. Yeah. It's the need to survive. It's that our back is always up against the wall. And I'll quote you something that Chaim Eshed, who was basically the father of the idea that Israel could launch a satellite into space, but came up with the idea in the 1970s after Anwar Sadat made his historic visit to Israel, and basically Israelis understood we're headed towards peace with Egypt, and that means evacuating the Sinai and withdrawing from that big piece of land. And how are we going to keep our eyes on the Sinai? And he said, we're going to launch a satellite at a time that only superpowers had satellites. But he said to me a line that I'll never forget: the shadow of the guillotine sharpens the mind. And it is still so true, even as we are in 2025. Like no one I think today thinks that Israel's about to be destroyed, thankfully, right? We have many threats, but we're still very strong. But we have that existential factor. We have that idea that we know that if we don't come up with this, there's no one else. It's on us.
Right.
And that is a motivation that you're not going to get at MIT or at Caltech or anywhere else in the world. Nowhere can you buy that type of motivation.
Okay, so Israel, as we've been saying, Israel does have this multi-tiered defense system. It's got the Iron Dome, it's got David's sling, it's got the arrow systems. I want to just ask how they work together, the interoperability of these three systems, and where Iron Beam fits into it.
So at the moment, the layers work like you said. You have Iron Dome for the short range rockets. Iron Dome has been gone through many upgrades over the years since it first became operational in 2013, and today is really capable of doing things that the original creators and inventors did not think was possible, with a lot of software changes and even some minor upgrades to the Tamir interceptor, the actual missile that's launched. It's able to intercept even some medium-range rockets and others that were not originally intended for. But you have Iron Dome, let's say, for the lower range and level of missiles. David's sling is meant to intercept the medium-range missiles and rockets, and as well as cruise missiles. So cruise missiles, let's think for a moment, short-range rockets, ballistic missiles, medium-range missiles, rockets, they fly vertically, and then they come down at you. Cruise missiles fly horizontally, right? So a different type of interception, and you need to be able to attack them in a different way. David's sling is able to do that. And then, of course, we have arrow, and we have two versions of arrow right now, arrow 2 and arrow 3. Arrow 3, the main difference is the range, although there's also a question of how the warhead explodes. Is it a proximity explosion, or is it a hit-to-kill explosion? The difference being, hit to kill means the missile actually hits the incoming projectile. Proximity means it blows up right next to it. So it detects that it's right next to it. And right then, in that millisecond or whatever it is, it detonates and the shrapnel destroys the incoming warhead.
But by the way, let me just pause you there for a second, because it's another example of something that was thought to be in the missile defense world completely bonkers. That you could even have accurate, predictable hit-to-kill, metal-to-metal contact. That was thought to be almost impossible before Israel made it a normal part of its tactical operations.
No, 100%. I mean, and the truth is we've seen this happening, unfortunately, way too often over the last 2 years, but against missiles that have been fired from Iran, where the arrow has performed really unbelievably. And unfortunately, it's now almost every week where we have a missile that the Houthis are firing towards Israel, and Israel is intercepting those with the arrow as well. But with arrow 2 and arrow 3, basically, arrow 2 is a lower altitude. Arrow 3 is in outer space, essentially. So it means much farther away from Israel. The idea being there that if it's a long-range ballistic missile, it could potentially be carrying a non-conventional warhead. So that could be either chemical weapons, biological weapons, or God forbid, nuclear weapons. You want to destroy that as far away from main homeland, from Israel, as possible. Iron Beam, at the moment, in its existing iteration, will only really fit into the lower category at the moment, right? It will be effective right now from what we're told, and there's still a lot that we don't know, but from what we're told by the Defense Ministry and by the main contractors, have to be said, are Rafael and Elbit, two of Israel's leading defense companies. It's effective against short-range rockets. It's effective against drones. It's effective against some mortar shells as well. Basically, what we're talking about is short ranges and slow-moving targets, right? So anything that is far away, anything that is moving super fast, like at hypersonic speeds, such as an incoming ballistic missile that's coming from outer space towards you, currently will not be effective. This does go back to the dwell time that we could get back to, as you had mentioned and pointed out before, but it will fit in right now at that lower end of what we can do. But think for a moment, Jonathan, of the economic benefit here. Every Iron Dome interceptor is costing Israel anywhere from about $50,000 to $100,000. Okay, so when you have a missile coming towards you from Gaza or from Lebanon, for that matter, we're talking about Katyusha rockets, Grad rockets. These are modeled after old Soviet versions of a very old, primitive, no guidance system. Couple dozen kilos of explosives. Obviously, can cause damage and kill people if it's a direct impact. but what we would call a stupid rocket, right? No, nothing precision, no sophistication to it. You just kind of line it up, point it in the direction that you want it to go, and then, fire it. Costs maybe a few $1,000s, if that much, right? Depending how they're making it and where it's coming from. You're spending about $100,000 sometimes to shoot out something that's just a few $1,000s. Now, the argument in favor of it would be, well, the damage it would cause and the casualties it will cause are obviously going to be much higher. So the $50,000 to $100,000 is, peanuts compared to the loss of life or damage to a building. But still, that does impact your economy. And listen, let's be also honest. Over the last 2 years, it's had an impact on Israel.
Yeah,
right? No questions. Iron Beam is a couple bucks.
Hold on a second, because this economic asymmetry is worth dwelling on for forgive the term here, is worth spending some time on, because it's really really important, and that's because not only is Israel, of course, committed to protecting its vital infrastructure, its civilian population. Of course, Iron Dome has performed magnificently to do that, but it has done that by very often building into, I think, as I understand it correctly, redundancies, such that if there's a single incoming projectile that is going to threaten some vital target, Iron Dome doesn't send one interceptor. It might send 3 interceptors to really make sure that and that means that for every couple $1,000 Katyusha rocket, which is sent toward Israel, if every one of the interceptors costs $40,000-$50,000, to send, I mean, the asymmetry is going to bankrupt a country.
And I think that's to some extent what the enemy has tried to do. But even, what Iron Dome also did is one of its brilliances, I would say, or amazing elements or aspects, is the fact that it is able, with its command and control system, to very quickly, literally within milliseconds, project the trajectory of the incoming enemy projectile. So it sees it launched from Jabalia in Gaza, and it can automatically tell, based on speed and velocity and range, where is it going to land. And then it can tell you, is it going to land in an open field, or is it going to land in a residential area? If it's going to land in the open field, you're not going to waste an Iron Dome on it.
Right.
Now, you could always say, well, there might be somebody in the field. True. But you're always going to have to weigh and measure what you have available and how much you can use them. If I see that it's going to land in a residential area, then yes, in that case, like you said, I'm not going to fire 1 rocket. I'm going to fire 2 rockets, right? And if I see it's coming potentially and it's going to hit the oil refinery in Haifa, right? Then I'm going to fire even more than, 2 or 3. By the way, Arrow, I'll take you back to, I think it was May of this year, when a Houthi rocket landed and struck within the compound of Ben Gurion Airport, right? Everyone remembers that. The entire world shut down. No planes were coming to Ben Gurion. The entire world shut down. You can only fly El Al in or out of Israel. After that, because the Arrow failed, Israel started for a period of time to launch more than 1 arrow at every incoming Houthi missile. Now, the Houthis don't care. There's no cost-benefit analysis that they're doing. But think, you know how much, we spoke about $100,000, $50,000 for an Iron Dome interceptor arrow? $1 million plus for 1.
Yeah.
Right. This is huge amounts of money. And then you have a situation with Iran where they're firing a couple hundred at you, right? This literally has the ability, forget about bankrupting the country, because, you could go try to raise money somewhere, but you're going to run out of interceptors.
Right.
Which is an even bigger problem.
Right. And just to, invite our listeners inside of this kind of strategic thinking about how to make this even more costly to an adversary. The Iranian, you can't blame them. This is smart of them. The Iranians, of course, are also layering within their batteries of missiles. Some, I'm going to use very technical language, crappy ones, and some really smart ones. And so you sort of have to take them all seriously. but you're going to spend the same very heavy cost on interceptors for, more and less lethal projectiles.
And I think also the thing to keep in mind here is if we look, for example, at the 12-day war in June between Israel and Iran, and you had just under 30 people who were killed in that war here in Israel, which is each loss of life is a tragedy and is an entire world that is gone. But when we think about the fact of how many hundreds of missiles that they fired at Israel and how Israel is able to intercept just around 90% of them. Now imagine that 90% of them were not intercepted. Imagine that they landed. Imagine what damage and how many people would have been killed in this country. So this isn't science fiction. This is real. When you know that you have a system that is reliable, durable, and extremely effective, it's a game changer.
Let me ask you about you mentioned that Rafael and Elbit are the two private sector producers of the Iron Beam system. I understand that the 100 kilowatt laser source is manufactured by Elbit. They were able to produce something that, as you said, Northrop Grumman and some of the big guys in America had struggled to produce, for years and years. So I just don't understand. What was the thing that they were able to do that no one else could figure out? Like, how could they overcome the challenges that the other producers couldn't?
No, it's a very good question, and it gets into technical things that I also don't fully have a grasp over completely. But what it has to do is being able to create a high enough energy laser that can dwell and remain on a target for several seconds. Those two things, to be able to put those two together, is extremely difficult. One, we're talking about a moving target.
Right.
So though to be able to do that, people are able to create lasers. We've known about lasers for a long time. They can do amazing things, high-powered lasers. But to be able to have a laser that can move in battlefield conditions and be able to stay on a moving target with that high-powered 100 kilowatt effectiveness or power is something that's what's groundbreaking here. How they're able to do it, what type of laser. There's a couple of different components that they put together into one different, mostly made here in Israel. That's the genius here behind this.
That's a really big deal too. This mostly made in Israel, because another thing that friends of Israel and Israeli planners have learned over the course of the last 2 years is just how reliant Israel can be on some of the critical hardware it needs to protect itself and its civilians. And if, in fact, so much of the main components of Iron Beam can be reshored and manufactured locally in country, that would be another element of why it's so strategically valuable.
Well, I mean, this is also, to some extent, one of the great lessons of this war is the understanding, and it's something that Israel sees in almost all of its conflicts, is the understanding that we really don't have who to rely on. Obviously, the alliance that Israel has with the United States is, I call it existential. Israel would not be able to fight and defend itself the way it does without the help of the United States. Not to mention the fact that billions of dollars have been poured into this project, and there's been a sizable chunk of that has actually come from the United States government for Iron Beam, not to mention the assistance that's always given for Iron Dome, even in the difficult periods that Israel had with the Obama administration and others. I mean, there was always funding that was provided to Israel by consecutive U.S. governments. Arrow is a system that is jointly developed by Israel Aerospace Industries and Boeing. David Sling is a system that is jointly developed by Rafael together with Raytheon. So Israel's missile defense systems are really a source or an illustration of that amazing relationship and alliance that Israel has with the United States. But with that said, look, we see what's going on in the world today. We see the growing diplomatic isolation that Israel finds itself under. We see countries around the world that are calling for an arms embargo, and we see resolutions that are being brought to the U.S. Senate by different senators who are calling for a freeze on weapon shipments and military aid to Israel by the United States. So, while that might not be happening now, and we don't have to worry about those resolutions passing through the Senate today, can we say that will be the same in 5 years from now? I don't think so. So for that reason, the more we make this domestically, the more we develop it on our own, the more we will be able to stand on our own 2 feet when the time is needed.
I also think it goes in the other direction as well. The more everything you just said is right, the more Israel can stand on its own 2 feet, the more it can be self-sufficient, the more it can protect itself, and in a time and manner of its own choosing, the more it has this diplomatic asset that it can offer to friends and allies to weave into their national security, their own defenses.
No, I think you're 100% right. I mean, we have to stop looking today at Israel as I think it's unfortunately a lot of people are looking at Israel as something of a burden or, more of a problem than as an asset. Israel's an asset today to countries around the world. Unfortunately, the Europeans don't get this. But, if I'm a country like the United States and I'm looking at what the war that Israel's fighting, and even if I have my criticism of what Israel and maybe the way it targets some targets in Gaza and maybe some attacks or strikes that I might think are disproportionate, whether that's the case or not, put that aside for one moment, because we could argue about that, but put that aside. What Israel has gleaned in this war over these last 2 years, right? Tunnel warfare, missile defense architecture, unlike anything seen before, ground warfare and capabilities, testing its ground forces against the most sophisticated and ruthless guerrilla forces that exist in the world, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, fighting in civilian urban conditions and terrains unlike anything that's ever been seen. So from your Air Force to your intelligence collection, to your missile defense, to your tunnel detection and tunnel destruction, I want to learn from the Israelis, right? Israel's an asset. And when we think about this really in an intelligent way, then we understand that these are threats that Israel today is dealing with. But if we have a little historical context, then we recognize that, unfortunately, it doesn't end with Israel.
No, indeed not. So let's come back to that too. Yaakov, I've been trying to... You can't help but be impressed and in a way wowed by the prospects of what Iron Beam could offer. Because, for all the reasons we've said, primarily the economic one. That at roughly, I'm not sure exactly the source of this calculation, but the calculation sort of going around is that every one of these beams, which is shot up to intercept a target, costs about $2, something like that, compared to the $50,000 of an Iron Dome interceptor. You can't but be impressed and by that. And yet there are some limitations that have been reported on as well for the Iron Beam system. One is this phenomenon I've been reading about called blooming. And apparently what blooming is that as the laser goes through the air, it begins to disperse. And so that 100 kilowatts of power begins to disperse. And by the time it hits a target that is a little farther away, it's already that much weaker.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about how Israeli engineers have been trying to deal with that problem?
Well, the power that you have, so in other words, Israel's right now, the current system that we're talking about, the Iron Beam, the main ground-based system, is said to have 100 kilowatts of a high-powered laser. There's a system that's being developed, for example, by Lockheed Martin in the United States that is said to, rumored at least, to have potential of up to 500 kilowatts. Okay? So what the difference is between 100 and 500 is going to be the distance, right? And that is very significant when we're talking about longer range and higher altitude threats. But there's also other issues, right? There's the issue of adverse weather conditions. If there's fog, if there's clouds, if there's some atmospheric disturbance, right? If there's something going on in the sky, that will also impact the ability of the laser to be effective. They say, and again, I can't explain the science behind it, but they say that they have done some things that give it the ability to still operate even when there's cloudy skies. We'll have to wait to see. But I think that the way to look at this is that it's another layer on a multi-layered system.
Right.
So is it going to be your first choice? Is it going to be your second choice? Are you might in the beginning still try Iron Dome? Are you going to look at the weather and determine based on that? There's going to be a lot of conditions and a lot of factors that Israel is going to be taking into consideration. And that's why, for example, a number of years ago, the Air Force, which is responsible, there's a branch in the Air Force called the Air Defense Division, which is responsible for all missile defense. They created a hub, or I guess a command and control center in one of the Air Force bases in the center of the country, where they make all those decisions. So they have everything working together. They have all the different layers. By the way, including even American systems that are occasionally deployed here as needed. Like we've seen the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Defense System, that was brought here to help defend against the Iranian missiles. It's plug and play. So they all come together. You see the entire picture. You know where your assets are. You know how many missiles you have on this launcher and how many launchers you have and where they're located. You know about the incoming threat based on your radar systems, and also, by the way, integrated with American radars that are farther away and able to pick up on threats like from Iran that your own radars that are based only in Israel can't yet see.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can start to decide, okay, what system am I using? So that command and control is so important, right? I mean, we can't ignore that aspect of it as well. There's going to be a lot of considerations here in the different algorithms and in the human man in the middle who's going to have to make the decision. Do I shoot an Iron Dome now or do I shoot an Iron Beam?
Right. You know, the point that you made about weather is not insignificant. Of course, in the northern part of the country and defending from Iranian and Syrian and Lebanese, based targets, based threats, that is a part of the country in which, it can be cloudy and rainy, during major parts of the year. And in the south of the country and in the western Negev and the Gaza envelope, of course, it can be very dusty. And making this more resilient to adverse weather would seem to be another step as this technology continues to develop.
And I think that those are exactly the things that Israel is focused on.
Yeah.
So if we have to look at what Iron Beam is going to be next, right now we're at the initial early system.
Yeah, I mean, this has just gone operational. Yeah, yeah.
It's just going operational, but there's a whole world ahead.
Yeah.
And that world will be weather conditions. It will be the power. So going from 100 kilowatts to maybe 1,000 one day.
Mm-hmm.
It will be to the amount of dwell time that you're able to be on a target, to be able to intercept even fast-moving targets. And it will also be to how do I deal with threats that are farther away that I might not be able to get to when they're coming through space. So, for example, if I think about Iranian missiles, if I could potentially put a laser on a drone or an aircraft. Take the 12-day war as an example, Jonathan. We created air superiority over Iran. We took out their air defense systems. We basically were able to fly over Iran like we wanted to. Now imagine if I could put a laser on an aircraft, and even as the missile's in boost phase, so it's just taking off, I could shoot it with a laser. Yeah. Or it's just starting to fly, I could shoot it with a laser. Or it's in the launcher, I could shoot it with a laser. I mean, this is a game changer.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be a system on ships. We already have Iron Dome on ships. We're going to have Iron Beam on ships. Lower kilowatt, because it's a smaller system, more compact. But that's also going to be capable of giving protection to ships, or when ships are patrolling along and around Israel's gas rigs and gas fields to protect Tamar or Leviathan, the different gas rigs.
Right.
I mean, those are strategic assets. Now you'll be able to defend them with lasers. It's a whole world that we're just taking our first steps in.
So maybe, as we're continuing to think about its realistic uses and the ways in which it's still got limitations that we can see, Maybe now's the time to spend talking about that dwell time and what it means and why it's significant. So, as I understand it, the reason why dwell time is important is because it means that the laser has to be fixed on a particular target for X number of seconds. I don't know, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever it is. That sounds like a very short amount of time, except by comparison with the interceptors we've been talking about before, if the Iron Dome interceptor makes contact, it instantly smashes to smithereens the thing that it contacts with. So that is a difference, and it might be a vulnerability. It's hard to know.
Look, the dwell time is the key here, right? And it's the big challenge, because what dwell time basically means in simple terms is I need to have Iron Beam locked on a target, but not just locked on a target, locked on a single spot on the target for however many seconds that is. Israel does not reveal exactly. What it seems to be the case is we're looking at 3 seconds to maybe even up to 5, 6, or 7 seconds, right? Now that might seem like nothing, but when you have a target that's moving fast, that might be even spinning, that might be changing course suddenly because maybe it's sophisticated, that might be a fast-moving drone that could suddenly move, and you can't stay fixed on its fuselage or on its wing. Suddenly a cloud comes in the way, and the laser gets disrupted, and you have that blooming effect. Suddenly you have multiple targets, and your laser starts to get confused what the target might be. There is really critical and crucial your command and control system. This is the real I guess challenge. And as of now, again, the focus is on the slower moving targets, initial stage, initial capability. As this will be tested, as it will be battle proven and hardened, Israel will want to proceed and progress or advance to longer time, stronger energy, stronger lasers with the ability to dwell for longer. But this is very difficult and not something that Israel, or anyone for that matter, has been able to do yet.
So, Yaakov, you have recently published a book about the October 7th attacks while Israel slept, which aims to try to answer the question of how Hamas was able to surprise this unbelievably power security state. I was able to surprise Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military. Now, that tragedy partly stemmed from an over-reliance on technology, on the smart fence surveillance systems, on the belief that, in some level, technology could replace human vigilance. Now, Iron Beam obviously represents this unbelievable technological innovation and step forward. We celebrate it. At the same time, though, I think the human analysis that you've done would give us some pause. While we do want to celebrate this achievement, we also have to recognize that it's an occasion to remember the limits and the role of technology in Israel's defense, too.
100%. I mean, Iron Dome, and I'll say something that might sound controversial. Iron Dome is an amazing system, but really, we probably never should have invented it. And I say that half meaning it and half not meaning it. Meaning it, not meaning it because it has been amazing. It saves lives. It protects us. It's incredible. It swats missiles out of the sky like a mosquito. But it gave us a sense of security, and it made us believe that Hamas could be there with its rockets, and we just don't have to care because they can't hurt us. And that created an illusion, together with other systems and other technological advances. Talk about when they started popping out of tunnels in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge. We said, okay, we'll dig a wall and we'll build an underground wall. We called it the Iron Wall. Then we built a system still highly classified with sonar experts and seismic experts to detect where the tunnel's being dug and when it's being dug and how it's being dug. How many people snuck in, invaded Israel on October 7th in a tunnel? 0, right? They all came above ground.
Right.
So, the technology was one of the key pillars of the policy of containment that Israel fell in love with, or I call it the fairy tale, that ultimately was the prism through which we saw and looked at everything, all intelligence, everything that we saw in Gaza. And sadly, tragically, the failed policies that led to the October 7th attack. While Iron Beam is, again, incredible, and we should hail this day because it really is another illustration of the amazing ingenuity, innovation, creativity of this country and its people. The last thing we want to see happen, though, is for it to give us once again this false sense of security. Missile defense is hugely important, right? I cannot imagine a reality without it. But we cannot go back to a place that we think that because we have missile defense, we don't have to go on the offense. And that was, to some extent, the thinking up until October 7th. I think one of the great changes we've seen since October 7th has been the understanding that we cannot allow our enemies to once again amass these massive arsenals of rockets and missiles. And you see that the preemptive strike policy, this new doctrine, so-called, in our national defense, is taking hold. There are bombings all the time still in Lebanon, even though there's a ceasefire. The war continues in Gaza. We still attack occasionally in Syria. This is all about the understanding we're not going to let those enemies rebuild. We're not going to let them amass weapons. We're not going to go back to a reality that Hamas had tens of thousands of rockets and Hezbollah over 100,000 rockets.
Right. Monitoring capability rather than intent.
And that's where we were. We would see it when we just kind of write down where it was. But we let them amass that. Because we also said to ourselves, oh, well, we have the missile defense systems. They can protect us. Now we recognize, no, it's an integral part. It's a component of our national security, but it's not the solution. It's part of the defensive measures that we have for when we are attacked.
Just goes to show that while we should celebrate, while we do celebrate and we should celebrate innovations like Iron Beam, nevertheless, it comes down to the prudence and courage of Israeli decision makers and the soldiers, the women and men of the IDF, who are going to keep the country safe.
100%. I mean, you could have the best systems and the best soldiers and the best people. And by the way, October 7th is a perfect example to what you just said, Jonathan. We have the best people, the best soldiers, the best technology, and really, I think the most advanced military, or one of the most advanced in the world, but we weren't looking at things in the right way. We weren't analyzing the information in front of our eyes. And our policies that were being set from above and trickling down were wrong. We now know that. Mm-hmm. So we can have great technology, but if we're not using it in the right way, then it's gonna be to our failing as opposed to our success.
This conversation was recorded on September 25th, 2025. Yaakov Katz, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.